What form of literature is Genesis? I know that may seem a bit academic, but when it comes to the book of Genesis, we do need to be aware of what kind of writing we are reading. You see, forms of reading may not very often cross your mind, but if you really sit back and think about it, you do have different expectations for different genres of reading. You read different things different ways. For example, I'm going to give you a few different book titles, and let's see if you can get where I'm going. See, with these titles, you're probably going to begin to understand what I'm saying. Here are the book titles: The Life and Times of George Washington Carver, John Carter of Mars, The Selected Poetry of Emily Dickinson, and The Communist Manifesto. Now, hopefully, just from these titles, you can see that these are all books, but they are all different genres, or as we would say, styles. And a person picking up the various books would have different expectations when picking up said book. For example, The Life and Times of George Washington Carver is a narrative biography about a godly American inventor and farmer. In reading that book, you would learn about his life in the post-Civil War South. It's a book that relays history around George Washington Carver. However, if you open John Carter of Mars and read it as a biographical history, you'd probably be in for quite a shock. Because even though John Carter begins in the post-Civil War America, like The Life and Times of George Washington Carver, you're going to see from there the title goes into a much different place. Likewise, if you read the poetry of Emily Dickinson, who was also alive in America post the Civil War, even though she, like George Washington Carver, was a real person, unlike John Carter, you would not read her poetry as a narrative or a biography. You see, her vivid imagery and prose take you down a far different way of thought than reading, say, a science fiction or a narrative biography would. Nor would you grab the Communist Manifesto and reading expecting to find poetry or a good lighthearted adventure on another planet. You see, it's written as a polemic or an argument for a certain way of thinking, a certain philosophy. My point is, knowing your genres matters. So the question is, what kind of genre or writing then is the book of Genesis? Is it a poem? Is it a history book? Is it an allegory? Is it an apologetic? An ancient science book? Or is it a self-help book? I mean, this is a very important question because Genesis 1 is structured as a poem, as are several other passages in Genesis. What we need to realize is that Genesis, though containing poetry, linguistic wordplay, and strong polemic language, is a historical narrative text. Now, first off, the historical narrative is not what we think of as a history book. It's not a dense collection of data and facts. Rather, it's more in line with the George Washington Carver biography I mentioned. You see, historical narrative is a representation of selected past events for the purpose of instruction. Now, note the word selected. Selected past events, not exhaustive past events. In short, the author of Genesis, or other historical narratives for that matter, are not trying to record every possible event they can find dealing with the subject matter. In other words, Moses, as the author of Genesis, is not recording every possible event he can dig up. Although, for the sake of study, that probably would have been helpful. But rather, Moses is selecting a particular themes, particular events, and ideas for a particular reason. You see, Moses is using a practice called the principle of selectivity. Yeah, another one of those great exegetical principles, right? First contemporization and now selectivity. Just hold on to the idea that Moses, as the author of Genesis, has a reason he recorded the particular events he did, a reason he selected the events he selected, and a reason he recorded them in the particular literary styles he chose to record them. You see, in historical narrative, the author tells the stories or events he or she chooses for a particular purpose. They use selectivity to do it. Now, Moses not only selects certain events, but certain vocabulary and terminology. In other words, much of the vocabulary and terms we fly over quickly in Genesis 1 to 3 have a far deeper meaning in regards to the rest of the Torah. What we need to step back and ask is, what was the reason the author chose to record the certain events in Genesis 1-3 in the particular way he did? Why did he choose poetry, wordplay, word pictures, and various other forms of literature that you've probably already forgotten you once learned in your high school English class? Why did he use these? Moses will usually see all different types of literature to heighten the senses and awarenesses of his audience. It's a very sophisticated and artistic form of literature. You see, Moses has put Genesis 1-3 together in a way that is more of an art form than just a plain linear history. You see, if the book of Genesis was a movie, we are seeing only the parts of the movie the director, in this case Moses, wants us to see. You see, it's his cut. The author, through the text, is creating our views. He's crafting how we are to see these historical events. We are seeing this movie from the angle and the viewpoints he, Moses, the director, wants us to see. So hear me here. We need to pay more attention to what he puts into his account, or rather what he leaves in his account, than rather what's not there or what he leaves out. Remember, Genesis is not so much written with history or science in mind. Rather, it's written with theology in mind, a strong, robust theology in which the children of Israel can base the foundation of their new kingdom on. Science changes. History, sadly, is forgotten. But knowing God is the chief end of man. So let me end with a warning from the Old Testament theologian John Sailhamer. Sailhamer said that we as readers are not free to do or say whatever he or she pleases about the meaning of a text. The reader must understand the text in terms dictated by the grammatical constraints of the language in which it was written. And while it is true that reading a biblical text is more than merely a grammatical or syntactical and lexical study of the Hebrew Bible, it is certainly not less. As readers of these biblical texts, we stand before them as their authors have constructed them, and we look to them, the texts themselves, for our understanding of the world they depict.